Hi everybody, it's Break here, and the awesome rolling Jupiter-8. Today's video is going to be focusing on the Jupiter-8 LFO, our different waveforms we have to choose from, a little bit about the routing options, and about the LEDs here that are flashing there. And I'll also show examples of each waveform and what they sound like. Okay, first off, a LFO just stands for low frequency oscillator. And it is actually a secondary modulation source signal that is below 20 Hertz, and it's a Hertz stands for cycle per second, and it's a signal that's used to modulate a sound without introducing another source. So it's kind of like invisible. It's very, very low frequency, so we really can't hear it. But it actually will have an effect on the oscillator or the filter or the amp, and it will do so silently without causing any extra noise mixed in there. The three most common ways we can actually route an LFO on here is to our VCO, and there's a whole section just for the VCO modulation because it involves pulse width modulation as well. We can route it to our lovely VCF we have here, and there's our LFO option there. I'm going to set LFO mod up there. And then our VCA. And there's this LFO option. And it's 0 to 3. Okay. So those are our three most common ways we can route it. I'm also going to show examples of the waveforms as well and routing them to different destinations. And these LEDs up here are for monitoring purposes only. They're showing us right now the rate of the LFO, or the cycles per second. Also, when they flash in unison on the Jupiter-8, it means that it's in whole mode, or manual mode. When it is flashing independently, that means that split or dual is chosen, when there's two patches here. And then we'll flash independently, showing you the rate of the upper and lower. So right now, upper is obviously faster than lower. Okay. I'm going to set this back to whole mode, and have just a basic square wave sound here. I actually made a square wave, very boring square wave patch to show pulse width modulation as well, once we get to the LFO that's routed there. Alrighty, so I guess I'll move on to our waveforms then. Right now, let's set to a sine wave. So this is what it sounds like. A sine wave is good for tremolos and vibrato. Right now it's at a very extreme rate and level, so it's not going to be, usable right now. Except for the weird sound effects or whatever, but you can actually tone that down and have a very nice vibrato at different rates and delay times. Okay, here's our saw wave. Okay, here's our square wave. And random sample and hold. Okay, I'll go back to our square wave. And you can actually use this for making a little song out of. Okay, something basic as that. Back to our sample and hold. I'm going to increase the rate and also the level of our LFO modulation all the way to 10, so it's much more dramatic. You'll actually notice a higher pitch there. I'm going to increase the rate at a pretty fast rate. Kind of like a video game. Slow that down a little bit more. I'll slow that down even more to try to explain the explanation of a sample and hold circuit there. Okay, so what we're hearing right now is the sample and hold circuit actually consists of a pulse oscillator that is used as a clock or a trigger. So right now we're actually seeing each time it is triggered there, and the LFO LEDs will show that. any signal that is fed into this will be sampled at each pulse. So every time the pulse shows up, JP's circuit will sample it. And then the sampling will consist of holding the voltage level until the waveform of the next pulse is received. So basically all that means is it will actually hold the sound, so it'll stay at a certain voltage level. And each time that's changing, it's being sampled until the next voltage trigger is actually received. I'll speed that up a little. And it's doing that at very random voltages there. And since I have the LFO modulation set so high, it's actually going to be modulated pitch-wise much higher. If I set it down here to a very low level, it's not really going to modulate much. So it's actually confined within a certain pitch area, and that's because our VCO is what's being modulated. Okay. You can also route all these waveforms to the filter, so I'm going to go ahead and take the VCO out of the equation here and move on to our filter, and use each one of these waveforms again as a modulation source. I'll set our rate there. It's pretty fast right now. Let me slow this down. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to our filter. And I'm going to increase our LFO modulation all the way up so that we hear a pretty dramatic effect. This is what it shall sound like. And I'll go ahead and move our cutoff frequency down and resonance up. So now you can actually hear the filter sound like it's opening and closing at the rate that I have set here. Now I'm going to change it to pulse wave. It's much more of a harsh waveform. It's not so smooth because it's not a sine wave. Here's our square wave. Okay, and there is a frequency that's really deep because of where this is a square wave. It's a really deep sound, so we're probably not hearing it on the phone, but it is there. Here's our sample and hold routed to our filter. Very typical synthesizer sound there. Increasing our rate. Okay. And then we're going to move on to our VCA. I'm going to turn the VCA all the way up as far as our LFO and go back to our sine wave. Okay. Saw wave. Square wave. And sample and hold. So actually, our volume change is happening, but it's following the sample and hold circuit. But our volume will be changing at very random values now. I don't know how well you can hear that on the phone here. Anyway, so that's the basic example of each of the 4 waveforms that Jupiter-8 offers, routed to the oscillator, filter, and amp. And then lastly, I'll move on to our pulse width modulation when we have time. Switch the LFO on. Now our pulse width is being modulated by the random sample and hold. Saw wave. Square wave. And our sine wave. Okay, and there's the basics of the LFO routing to the VCO, VCF, and VCA, and also our pulse width modulation. And that is the Jupiter-8 LFO.